Okay, so we're going to be recording this lecture. All right, so we're on Module 3, starting bones. And then Module 4 will have a lot more about bones as we go. Okay. All right, so the skin is called the integumentary system. That's the big word for skin. But it also includes a few other things. Skin, glands, hair, and nails. All right, so all of these, we're going to go through each one of these and talk about the similarities, differences, that kind of thing that's going on with these deals. All right, so it turns out that the skin is our largest organ. You may not think of the skin as an organ, but it is our largest organ in our body. So let's start with that, okay? What are the functions of skin? All right, first of all, protection. Oh, you know what I want y'all to do? In your book, you have that box right there. I want you to draw a line right down the middle, and on the left side, I want you to write a few notes that I'm going to tell you, and on the right side, you're going to draw a picture. Okay? So, do you have a blank right above it?
Yes.
What does it say?
It says Introduction to the Immunitary and Skeletal System.
Okay, so you need to write down the integumentary system consists of, put skin, glands, hair, and nails on that first line. And I can get my book out so I can follow along.
Can we show this back leg?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, so you're going to put some notes now on the left side of that box right there, and those notes are going to include this. The functions are protection from the heat, from the sun, from heat, from bacteria. It's a barrier, all right? It's thin, but it's tough. It's stretchy, flexible, allows for free movement. You ever had like a sweater or something, and if you bend it too much, it kind of stays out of, like on the hanger, it'll be stuck up like that, right? You know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our skin doesn't do that. It's pretty cool, right? It stays with us. All right, homeostasis. It's waterproof. Homeostasis is the process of keeping us all together, right? Yeah, keeping everything in its proper place, right? So one thing is it's waterproof. That's another thing. We get into the pool or into a tub and we don't absorb all the water and become like a giant sponge. It's waterproof. By the way, the stuff that's waterproofing our skin is called cholesterol, which is very, very good for you. People talk about how horrible cholesterol is. No, we need it. It is self-conditioning. It helps to cool us off and heat us up. It's also self-mending. We've probably had a cut or something before, and it heals pretty easily as long as you wash your cut afterwards. You don't want a bunch of bacteria and stuff in there. All right, so you're going to write that on the left side, and I think leave some more room because you got more notes to put there. There are two layers to the structure of the skin. There are the epidermis and the dermis. The epidermis is the outer layer. It's composed of stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Y'all know what that is. And the dermis is deep underneath it, composed of a layer of dense, irregular connective tissue. You know what that is. And then beneath that, the third layer is called the hypodermis. It's not actually part of the skin, but it is made up of loose connective tissue. It's called the subcute. It kind of keeps the skin. If you ever notice, like on a dog, you can pick up their skin and it goes really high up. Ours doesn't really do that because our subcutaneous tissue is holding on a little more tightly. That's known as the hypodermis. You probably have heard of a hypodermic needle. Bless you. It's going to be an injection that goes down there. All right, so you have a few notes there about skin, and now you're going to draw a picture. Okay? So you're going to try to draw something kind of like that on the right side there of your box. So you're just going to draw some layers. What I want you to notice here is that there's this kind of undulating layer between the epidermis. I don't know if I can do that with my... Let's see. Can y'all see that? Probably not. No? Okay. Between the epidermis and the dermis, it's very bumpy right there. All right, and then you got all this stuff going down here in the dermis. There's a hypodermis. Notice something about the epidermis. There are no blood vessels actually going up into the epidermis. Wow. It's avascular. That's why it's thin. That's why the epidermis is so thin. You've probably heard that old joke, oh, your epidermis is showing. Well, it's just your skin, so the outer part of your skin. So it should be showing. And then you're going to see some different things. We're going to actually get into some of the details of what's going on in the dermis right there. Mostly for this picture, you're going to write that the upper part is the epidermis, the middle part is the dermis, and that lower connective tissue is the hypodermis. If you want to put a few of those features in, you can, but we're going to get to each one of those individually, so you'll have more time for that. I just want those bumpy layers between the epidermis and the dermis. All right, y'all good? We'll get to some more detail on that. All right, the next blank says to examine the skin on your hand with a magnifying glass. We'll do that next time, okay? But we're going to put right there, it's called you'll see lines on there, right? People can tell your fortune, right? I don't believe that, of course, but, you know, they look at your palm and do a palm reading or something. There's all these lines and stuff on there. Those are called lines of cleavage or lines of tension. And all over our body, these lines run in certain, and not every single person is exactly the same, but it's generally the same, where these lines run generally in these directions. They show the direction of collagen fibers that are in the dermis that give the strength and flexibility to our skin down there. When you cut across these lines, they can leave a scar. So plastic surgeons need to know these lines really, really well. Because I don't know if you may think of a plastic surgeon, someone is going to make you look more beautiful. No, yes, they do that. But if people have maybe an injury or something, then a plastic surgeon is hired to cut in such a way as not to leave a giant scar. Okay, so I have a scar here on my face. I had a little tumor that was growing right there. And I had my dermatologist said, yeah, that needs to be removed. It was not cancerous, nothing like that. It needs to be removed, but I won't remove it. I want a plastic surgeon to do it. So I've actually been to a plastic surgeon, but he just took this little thing off. And he left me a pretty good scar. But if you see right here, for instance, if you cut across the lines of cleavage like this, then that's going to gape open a little bit. It's not going to heal as easily. Now, I'm assuming that this wound would have happened not by a surgeon, but somebody, maybe an injury of some sort. And so you may have noticed, if you've ever had an injury, some scars are big scars, some scars are not very big scars. It probably had to do with where they were on the lines of cleavage. So if it goes along with the lines of cleavage, that closes up nicely, heals up really nicely, and that's what a plastic surgeon will look for. If he's going to be doing something, he's going to go along with those lines of cleavage in order to have healing that leaves very few scars. This would leave a gaping kind of a scar. All right. So now down at the dermis, so in that blank right there, you're going to just be writing lines of cleavage and tension, running in certain directions. You could also say that those are these zones right here. Well, it was under examine the skin of your hand with a magnifying glass, notice the lines. You can just write lines of cleavage across there. And then we're going to talk about the epidermis in a minute. I'm still in the dermis right here. Okay. Yeah, so you're just listening right here at this time. So that undulating area, that part was really the dips coming in like this right here. And the reason it's like that is to increase surface area. Because there's no blood supply to the epidermis, and so therefore those little bumps, the blood supply can reach up there and get those nutrients and oxygen to the tissues up there. One part there is called the reticular zone, right in here. Reticular, when you hear reticular, kind of like a web, like a spider's web. It's a network of protein fibers. They give strength in all directions. It is dense, irregular, but there is some good strength right there. All right, so this papillary zone with these undulations here are responsible for those lines of cleavage, and if you think your fingerprints, okay, so your handprint. That is the bumps. So the bumps you're seeing for fingerprints are the dermis beneath the epidermis. I think your book describes it like if I threw a sheet over this table, you would still see these bumps through the sheet, right? So our epidermis is like a sheet. I think I have a little, here it shows it. See, those would be our fingerprints right there. Okay, the epidermal ridges in our epidermis right here, and we're going to watch. A little thing about it.
Hi, this is David from Minute Earth, and these are my fingerprints. Each one has a particular pattern on it. A whirl, a loop, an arch, or in the case of my left thumb, a somewhat rarer double loop whirl. But even if your left thumbprint has one of the boring patterns, your print is unique to you. In fact, there's no one in the world, past, present, or future, who has a fingerprint that matches any one of yours. To understand why, we first need to know how they form. Early on in fetal development, lumps of stem cell tissues called volar pads grow under the skin on each finger. Whether the volar pad is small or big or off to the side or grows unevenly determines the main pattern of the fingerprint. An arch, a whirl, a loop, or even a very interesting and exciting double loop whirl. Because your volar pad size and orientation is somewhat genetic, many relatives and most identical twins have the same main patterns on each finger, and so DNA alone isn't where the uniqueness of fingerprints comes from. Instead, it comes from the chaotic way in which the fingerprints grow. On top of the volar pads, the embryonic skin has several layers of cells, all growing at different rates. And as the inner layer grows, the middle layer buckles, causing ridges to form in the upper layer. The ridges first form parallel to the three areas of greatest stress on a growing finger: near the fingernail, near the crease at the first joint, and on top of the volar pads. As the ridge lines grow, they sometimes run into one another, resulting in either a block or a split. The details of precisely where on the finger those ridge lines meet up and whether each one gets turned into a dead end or a fork is determined by a bunch of different factors, like how nerves and capillaries grow in the layer below the skin, fluid pressure changes in the womb, and even which direction the finger is oriented relative to gravity. And because there are chaotic and unpredictable differences in each of these, whether a given ridge becomes a dead end or a fork is essentially random, even for babies that develop in the same womb. The average person has around 50 forks or dead ends at different places on each fingerprint. Even if you oversimplify things, ignoring position and so on, and just think of each of these points as an independent coin flip between fork and dead end, there are more than a quadrillion different possibilities for fingerprints. To get a sense of how many possibilities that is, there are 80 billion fingerprints in the world, which are represented by this black dot. A quadrillion is 10,000 times larger. And remember, this is a simplification because the number of potential unique fingerprints gets way, way bigger when you take into account the relative positions of these points. So my left thumbprint and all my fingerprints and all your fingerprints are each pretty much mathematically guaranteed to be unique, to be the only ones in the world.
Oh, the world. Okay. Yeah, so even identical twins will have similar fingerprints, but not identical fingerprints. So that's like that environmental part of it, right? I think sometimes with identical twins, like if I looked at them, I might not be able to tell the difference, you know, because I wouldn't see the detail that somebody who is used to looking at fingerprints would be able to see. All right, so now our dermis, we have down in here various things. So we have nerves. So those nerves can reach up to the bottom of the epidermis right there. Those are just raw nerves. We have sweat glands. Sweat glands, we're going to see glands in a little bit there. I think these little ones here reach to the surface right there. We have sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are right up against hair follicles, and sebaceous has to do with the oils that are released through the hair follicles. We have the hair, and then we have a specialized little muscle for the hair called the arrector pili. Arrector pili makes the hair stand up. So you've ever had that feeling on the back of your neck when your hair goes whoop like that? That's those little muscles standing that up. And the idea there is to stand the hair up to protect you, to warm you up, really, is what it's supposed to, trap the air underneath there to warm you up. And then we have all sorts of blood vessels as well. And you can see a lot of adipose tissue down here in the hypodermis. And in certain parts of our skin, we have more adipose tissue than other parts of our skin. All right, but it's down there in that connective tissue right there. All right, now our hair follicles tend to grow. They grow down. This is kind of cool. If you look at the epidermis, you can see the basal. This is the lowest level of the epidermis, or the it's an epithelial lining right here. Notice, I want you to follow the purple ones. It goes all the way down into the hair follicle. All right. So into the hair follicle is that single thing there. So that would then have it's almost like you took that hair and pushed it down through the skin and kept that tissue with it, that upper epithelial tissue with it. And so therefore you have it buried deep in there. It's avascular still, but notice I have a blood supply coming up to the little bulb of the hair in the follicle. So this is known as the follicle, and then that blood vessel is coming right there. So, you know, if you cut your hair, That's not painful, which is good, right? Because that'd be, or it's not bleeding all over the place. But if you pull your hair out, that actually hurts a little bit. And that's because it has this blood vessel, and there's actually a little nerve there as well. Sometimes if you pull it, you can see actually a little drop of blood will come out of there. Now this allows for, this is kind of a cool deal, this allows for healing, because I don't know if you've ever had a burn that's severe, but there are kind of burns to our skin that can cause some severe damage to our skin. You know, the 1st degree burn would be considered like sunburn. And what tends to happen there, if you get a pretty good sunburn, is it's painful, it's red, and it'll peel off. The old tissue will peel off. So that's what we have in our 1st degree burn, a reddening of the tissue right there. It is actually burned to the, just through the epidermis. Just the epidermis gets burned for that. That's what we call a 1st degree burn. Now, if you get a 2nd degree burn, it actually burns down into the beginning of the dermis. All right, so then that's a bigger problem, because what do we have down there? We have nerves, we have those other glands, and those blood supply is all down in there. So that causes a worse burn. And then 3rd degree burn actually goes all the way down to the hypodermis. That's very bad. This is the type of burn that will leave a permanent scar. Now, what's cool about the 2nd degree burn right here, notice what is still available. So this tissue in the dermis, that upper layer right there, has been burned, but I'm going to go back one slide. This stuff all gets burned, but look at what is still there, the hair follicle. All right, so the hair follicle still has those epithelial cells in there that are alive, and they will actually start to push up and grow and replace that burned skin above it. It's pretty cool. And we have a bunch of them, you know, so a 2nd degree burn can actually it'll take time, but it will actually heal to the point that it may not even leave a scar, or just maybe a scar for a little while, and then as time goes on and more, because these cells of our skin are constantly growing, constant mitosis, epithelial tissue, right, constantly moving and growing. And they'll push that out, and it'll fix that. Yes.
I think I read somewhere that they changed the names of the burns.
Have they?
I feel like I did too, instead of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, to partial thickness and full thickness burns.
Partial thickness, and just 2, and full thickness?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look that up.
Which,
So this must be full thickness?
yeah, full thickness. Right?
Yeah, so 1st degree burn would just be very mild, I guess. Yeah. This one right here, there's the hair follicle's gone too, notice. So if the hair follicle's gone, then that epithelial tissue is gone. And so the best way to deal with a deep one, or whatever you call it, or 3rd degree that we used to call it, is to do what is known as a skin graft. So if the tissue is that damaged, then you'll have to have a graft that's done. So I have a friend who had a little girl who reached up and grabbed her mom's curling iron, and those get really hot. And she burned, and as she was letting it go, it kind of fell over this way, and it actually burned her hand like right about here. And it was quick, but it was a 3rd degree burn. And they had to end up doing a little graft on that. Typically, if you have a pretty good burn, the place they'll go get the graft is from your skin. They'll take it from your back. So they'll like take strips. That's because there's a lot of skin back here. And there's plenty, you know, of hair follicles there that will allow it to grow back itself pretty easily. Some people have said that it almost hurt worse than the graft almost hurt worse than the burn. And then they'll plant it right on top there, and they'll encourage it to grow, you know, and it'll grow in there. You'll end up with a scar. It'll be obvious that there is a extra chunk of tissue right there, but at least you've got skin covering it. If you didn't have skin covering, if we didn't do the graft, then that tissue would become infected very easily, because it's just open. There's no protection. So one of those functions of skin is for protection. Well, the protection's gone. And furthermore, one of the other protections about the waterproof part, you'll have fluid leaking out of your body, and it'll just be. You've had a burn before where it starts to weep a little bit, yeah. You know, or even like a blister type of a thing. That fluid will come out of your body. So a 3rd degree burn has to be attended by a physician. A 2nd degree burn, you could maybe try to treat that at home with some sort of home remedy kind of a thing. But you probably don't want to mess around too much with a bad burn, you know. So
I've had 2nd degree burns with sunburns on my shoulders.
with sunburn. Okay, wow. Okay, I had one time a burn that was it was purple up here, and my shoulders were purple. That was painful. I couldn't even put clothes on.
Yeah,
Oh my
it's
goodness.
just- my shoulders are still messed up. Like,
The skin is?
yeah, you can still tell it's a lot paler than like all my other stuff.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And then now it's still
And did it take a while to?
Oh, it took a long time. It was painful.
And now
to
you
go
never go in
back.
the sun anymore, right? You're
Yes,
like,
we-
I'm gonna wear a shirt out in the sun.
My
Yeah.
younger sister Gracie pulled a whole pot of soup,
Oh
a boiling
no.
pot of soup over on her arm, and it like swelled up and it had those huge.
So you think it was only second degree though?
I think it was only second degree.
Yeah. Okay.
My brother was close to a third degree though.
Yeah.
So that would have been grafting. Yeah.
It was like a pot of like boiling beans, and they leaned him over to blow the cake out, and then the thing fell over on him, and it got all over his chest.
Somebody was holding him.
Yeah, they held him like over, but they didn't notice the beans.
Weren't
And
paying
I don't know if they like if he fell, but it got everywhere.
Hers was
on
close
him.
to a
Does he still have a
second
scar?
degree.
He still has like a small scar, yeah.
Okay.
But,
Does he have any memory of it? Was he little? I'm guessing somebody was
He
holding
was like,
him.
I think he was like 6 or something. So and now he's 31 as
Oh.
of yesterday. So.
Okay. Happy birthday. Yeah. And Gracie, does she still have
I
scars?
don't think she has a scar.
Okay. Well, good. So it healed up. That means that that tissue from down in the follicle was able to come up and heal that up. So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff that God designed it that way to put those cells down in there that could cause that healing to take place. All right, which brings us to melanocytes. I know it's in your book somewhere. Oh yeah, see that blank that says what is melanoma? All right, so you're going to write down a melanocyte. So melanocytes are specialized cells found in the lower levels of the epidermis. So they're in the epidermis. We'll get to the stratum basale and spinosum in a minute. Melanocytes produce melanin. I want you to write that, melanin. And melanin is distributed to skin and hair by way of long processes on the melanocytes. They have it's like a spider coming out. And they send this, what they're sending up is melanin. Melanin is made in the Golgi apparatus and it gives color to your hair and to your skin. That's how we get the color. It's also a protective thing. So melanoma is cancer of the melanocytes. If there's uncontrolled mitosis of those melanocytes, then you can have something called melanoma, which is probably the most serious of the skin cancers out there. And melanin is dark colored. So a melanoma tends to be dark colored tumor. So like a dark mole or something like that. That tends to have maybe a irregular shape or something, or it grows quickly or something like that. But melanoma is a serious skin cancer. It needs to be removed, and then when somebody has been diagnosed with melanoma, the rest of their life they have to go to the dermatologist and just stand just like this, buck naked, and the dermatologist just looks them over to see if there's any. You got to look everywhere to see if there's any more little melanoma growing on them. All right. So what is melanoma? It's cancer of melanocytes, but melanocytes are the specialized cells. So here's a melanocyte. We're down in the epidermis here, and it's a specialized cell. See how it's reaching up here with these little arms, and it's sending out these I have a video for us to watch. I want to call it a dye, whatever it is. And what happens is when the sun will activate it. So if you go out in the sun, the melanocytes will start producing more melanin and send it up to your skin. That's why we get tan. Because we get darker because we're making more melanin, okay, that gets sent up to our skin. Let's watch a little. I thought it was going to do it by itself. There we go.
Skin covers all our bodies, but its color varies from person to person. To understand why, we need to peer inside its layers. Skin cells and their allies, hair, sweat, and oil glands, form a first line of defense from the environment. Skin's three main layers are each a distinct community of cells with different jobs. To see what gives skin its color, we need to focus on the outermost layer, the epidermis, and two important cell types, keratinocytes and melanocytes. The keratinocytes are the cells that form the surface of the skin and are on the front line for taking insults from the environment. Deeper down in the epidermis, right at the base of the layer, we find the melanocytes. These star-shaped cells produce the important pigment melanin. Let's zoom inside a melanocyte to see how this works. Melanin is produced inside what look like spheres throughout the melanocyte. These are the melanosomes. Chemical reactions inside melanosomes turn the amino acid tyrosine into melanin. The proportion of two main forms of melanin produced, a reddish-yellow type versus a black-brown type, the total amount of melanin in each melanosome, and the number of melanosomes in the epidermis all vary from person to person and determine their skin color. Melanosomes are the melanin factories inside melanocytes. But for melanin to do its job, melanosomes need to be transported to the keratinocytes via the melanocytes' long projections. Inside the keratinocytes, some melanosomes form a cap around the cell nucleus. The melanin inside the melanosomes absorbs the ultraviolet energy from sunlight, reducing the amount of ultraviolet radiation that reaches the nucleus, and in particular, the DNA inside the nucleus. Ultraviolet radiation can cause mutations in DNA that can lead to cancer. When ultraviolet radiation increases, melanin production increases, and more melanosomes are delivered to keratinocytes. Most people can adjust to greater exposure to the sun by turning up melanin production and tanning. But their genetic inheritance determines both the baseline color of their skin and how much it can tan.
All right, yeah, so each of us has a different amount. So you know friends who tan really well, friends who don't tan well, some who have very fair skin and it burnt, like I have one of my sons is very fair, and he burns and it peels and he's white underneath and no tan under there. He's like, oh, you know. So, yeah. All right, now in the bottom box there, you're going to once again draw a line down the middle, and on the left you're going to have some notes, and on the right you're going to have a picture. Okay, because we're going to be looking now at the layers of the epidermis, and I need you to write them down. Okay, so here we go. We have stratified squamous epithelium is thin, yet there are 5 layers. So the 5 layers of the skin here. That we're going to start at the bottom, and it's called stratum basale. Stratum basale. It's the deepest one there, and it's only 1 layer of epithelial cells thick. So that's what was going down into that hair follicle, that 1 layer thick. All right, next comes stratum spinosum. It's above it, stratum spinosum. And here, next comes stratum granulosum, which is above it. Stratum lucidum is only present in the palms of your hand and the soles of your feet. So the palms of your hand and soles of your feet have 1 extra layer of epidermis in them. And you notice they feel like they're a little thicker. And then we have the stratum corneum, which is the biggest one, many, many layers thick right there. And that's the very top layers right here. We're going to look at this word called desquamation here in just a minute. So stratum basale is the deepest, it's only 1 layer thick. Spinosum is several layers thick. Granulosum, so something interesting starts to happen in stratum granulosum right here. And that is that there is a release of what we call sebum, oil, things like this, that end up keratinizing the cells. So keratin gets released into them, and it starts to suffocate the cells. So the suicide begins in stratum granulosum. So these cells at the bottom are living, and these layers at the top are not alive. They're dead cells. And they're keratinized. All right, so these you're writing down, and we're going to draw a picture. I think my next picture will be easier for you to draw than this one, because you see all this stuff here, these undulations. We can straighten them out a little bit. We do know, of course, our fingerprints are a result of those up there.
That's what we're drawing.
No, I'm going to give you the next slide for you to draw.
And the one that starts with a G, that's the one that's in your finger.
Granulosum, yeah, this is where the keratinization begins. I think it's going to say it on our next one right here. So our basali, so you could draw this. Don't you think it's a little easier to draw here? Easier than that? No? So you can see our basali is one layer thick right here. Remember, this is the dermis down here. Then our spinosum, several layers, living. Then our granulosum, they're getting kind of squished here because they're starting to make that keratin. They're starting to shrivel up their nuclei because it's basically suffocating them with this keratin. All right, and so the cells above it are dead, and they're going to be heavy layers here. So the lucidum is a thin, clear layer found only in the, it says also the lips, the palms, soles, and lips. I missed that part about the lips. I will tell you that the thinnest skin is found on your eyelids, and the thickest skin, other than your palms and your soles, is on your back. And maybe that's why they do that skin grafting from there. The stratum corneum at the top consists of many layers of keratinized dead cells. They're all flattened out. It says non-nucleated because they're not really alive. And they go through a process called desquamation. And desquamation means they slough off. So you can even do, if you do this, you can probably see some of it coming off. You can rub it off. You know, the dust in your house is a lot of your skin cells. And it's kind of gross. That's what the dust is. And then, you know, there are little bugs that like to eat it, and those are called dust mites. So dust is made up of your skin cells and dust mites that are eating it. So a lot of people are grossed out by dust now. It's mostly from us. Yeah.
That's so weird.
Because we're constant. I used to have like a water bed, and the water bed has a plastic mattress. You know, obviously, because it's a giant plastic water balloon under there. And every time we would take all the sheets off to wash them, there was always that thin layer of dust on there. It was my skin. And I was like, oh, gross. Whereas a regular bed, it just kind of works its way down into the mattress. So.
Are waterbeds comfortable? I know it's really a topic of really well.
What I know is that when our heater broke, even in the summertime, it was so cold. It was so cold. We couldn't sleep on it even in the summertime. The heater has to be, and you think about it, the heater's underneath it. And so in order to put a new heater in, we had to dump all the water out and get it in. So we liked it when we had it. Now I don't have one anymore. So when the heater works, they're nice and warm. They feel great. All right, so you have those written down. Stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum, and then try to draw that little area there. Mostly what I want you to know is that basale is one layer. I want you to see those cells right there that you can see there's mitosis going on in there? So there's constant mitosis in these. They're going to be sending up the layers. So from basale, they send them up, and as soon as they send it up one layer, guess what? It's no longer basale. Now it's spinosum. And then those move up, move up, move up. Then they start to keratinize, and they move up, move up, move up. So the ones that are at the surface used to be down at the base. And they all just keep pushing up, pushing up, pushing up. And when you get to the top right here, you can see they're all kind of flattened out. Remember, we called it stratified squamous, right? So the squatty, flat ones at the top, bless you. And you're going to see, here's a picture of what they look like really close up. And it's kind of gross. Yeah. But that's why they can flake off so easily. So they're just sloughing off. Desquamation is the word, desquamation. To slough off and to just end up everywhere. All right, so that's happening in the skin, but there's also another important property of the skin, and that is the activation of vitamin D. All right, so it turns out, now we are very blessed to live in Texas for many reasons, but one of the reasons is we have sun most of the year. I have a sister-in-law who lives in Michigan, and she says they have sun very infrequently because they live by the Great Lakes, and there's always clouds in Michigan. And then in the winter it's cold and cloudy. And so they don't get as much sunlight on their skin. There's something called SAD, the seasonal affective disorder, and people don't have as much sunlight and they get sad. It makes them literally depressed, they get sad. And so getting a lot of sun is good for us, and one of the reasons is that the sun will actually activate in our skin this thing right here, this dihydrocortisol. Is that I'm saying it right? And then our liver turns it into vitamin D. Okay, so we go through all these processes, through the liver, through the kidney. There's a hormone in there that causes the vitamin D to be activated. And it turns out that that most people on the planet are vitamin D deficient. One of the reasons is we don't get enough sun on our skin. Now, I'm going to preach a little bit right here. I'm going to tell you that they have done research on people who, like villages, that had a higher incidence of this COVID virus. So let's talk about, in Italy, there's this little village, and they live in the mountains, and they had an unreal high level of COVID infections and high level of death. And so people are wondering what is going on, because the people who were just down the mountain living in the plains didn't have that problem at all. Well, guess what? The people in the plains had a whole lot more sunshine than the people up in the mountains. The people in the mountains, it was cooler and it was darker up there. They lived in forests and things like this, and they didn't have as much vitamin D. And so now we've decided that vitamin D is such a huge aid to our immune system that it is really great for us to have a good amount of vitamin D. I also I understand, we talked about sunburn earlier. Sunburn is bad. It damages tissue, it damages DNA, it can lead to cancers and things like this, but I am not a fan of sunscreen. I think we need to get some sun on our skin. I also am not a fan of sunburn. So therefore, if you're going to be out for 10 hours in the sun, put something, I'd wear a shirt, put a hat on, this kind of thing. But a lot of times that chemical gets, and it rubs into your skin, and there's one in particular, I think it's got to be off the market by now. But it was activated when it became cancer causing itself, but only if it was activated by, guess what? Sunlight. And I'm like, it's sunscreen, people. Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of sunscreen. But then, of course, like I said, I'm not a big fan of burning either. But just keep in mind that getting a vitamin D, if you want to take some artificial vitamin D, I use a liquid form that I squirt under my tongue, and it's supposed to be pretty good. So, but I also like to get sun. But we have days like this, no sun. All right, now we're going to talk about hair. Are we turning the page? Okay, so notice it says experiment 3.1. Skip that. That's going to be for lab next week. We're going to draw some stuff there. So next thing you're going to see, it says hair and nails consist of blank. They consist of keratinized. Can y'all see that? It's very small. Hair and nails consist of keratinized cells. That's Keratinized. Keratinized cells. Keratin is that kind of that greasy stuff that kills the cells, right? That it suffocates the cells. So therefore, the cells are not alive anymore. All right. There are two sections: the shaft and the root. The keratinized cells are arranged in 3 concentric layers. But what is the job of hair? What is its purpose? It's for warmth, protection, and the sense of touch. All right. So in that box below it, bless you, you're going to put a line down the middle again, and on the left you're going to write a few notes. And one of the notes you're going to write is function, warmth, protection, and sense of touch. Do y'all know any bald people?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they get cold easier.
Yeah.
So they have to wear a hat when they go outside. And when little babies come home from the hospital, they always put that little hat on them. That's because they're losing so much heat through that bald head of theirs. Well, assuming they're bald-headed. Not all babies are bald-headed. So definitely our hair helps to keep us warm. No question about it. You may notice that girls with our longer hair, we get hot easily in the summertime. We have to put it up and this kind of thing. So what about protection? We talk about, so think about, for instance, the hair on our eyebrows or the hair on our eyelashes right here. That's easy to see how that protects our eyes, right? It keeps the dust and stuff out of our eyes. If you ever been sweating enough that your eyebrows will actually deflect some of that sweat from getting into your eyes. That's how it kind of protects us right there. And then the sense of touch, we literally, if somebody, brushes alongside that, those little hairs move. And remember that hair down below had that little nerve associated with it, and so you actually feel it. Now, there's such a thing as a light enough touch that you can't feel it, like when a mosquito gets you, and all of a sudden you've got an itch. You're like, I never saw that mosquito, because he was such a light touch on there, you didn't feel it. But we'll see that the hair, when it moves, definitely helps it. Now, this is a close-up picture. You can see those layers of hair, kind of like the layers of the skin. And look here. This is where that hair is going down into the pore. And this is what the skin looks like around it. That's what that top layer, it's really crazy looking, huh? Remember, that's all going to be sloughing off and stuff like that. Okay, so we're looking at the follicle. So we have the shaft and the root. I think probably this is the picture you're going to want to draw in there. It says draw a picture, yes? Yeah, you're gonna draw this picture of the hair going down into the skin like this. We already know a couple of things about it. We know that tissue, it's kind of this pink color here, goes all the way down into the follicle with the hair. Remember, that's our burn help right there. I want you to go ahead and draw down at the bottom. You have the little blood vessel coming in right there. You can also say there's a little nerve there if you want to. There's this stuff called matrix, hair matrix. That's what's the growing part right there. That root down there is called the bulb of the hair. The follicle's lined with the epithelial cells. And then there's a gland called a sebaceous gland. And we'll get to some details on that in a minute, but the sebaceous gland is manufacturing and releasing oil. And the oil is going out through the follicle onto your hair. So if you don't wash your hair for a while, you'll notice how it gets a little oily. That's actually very good for your hair. It moisturizes your hair. If you wash your hair too much, it gets kind of frizzy and a little too dry, you know. So it's okay to let your hair get a little oily. I think maybe socially we have a problem. People are like, oh, oily hair, gross. No, it's actually very good for your hair. One of my daughters-in-law is, you know, she doesn't wash her hair, like it's every 4 days or something. She washes her hair because she doesn't want to get it all dried out. I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. But that moisturization is coming from that sebaceous gland right there. Okay, and of course we know the color. Next time what we'll do, we'll actually pull a piece of your hair and look at it on the scope next week. I make you pull it from the root so we can take a look at that root. And then we can look at maybe the difference in some of our hair color. It's kind of fun to see that in the microscope. Mostly, unless your hair is very dark, lighter hair is going to just look transparent in the microscope. All right, y'all have a good picture drawn? We've got to see this really shows off those. Oh, right here. What about this? The arrector pili muscle. Remember, that's what stands the hair up. Stands the hair up, and therefore, like you get goosebumps. You know what I'm talking about with goosebumps. It's on your arm right here. And the hair will all stand up, and that little arrector pili actually causes that muscle to bunch up, and it makes a little bump, a little goosebump. We call it goosebumps because when you pluck a goose, it leaves them with those little bumps all over them, you know. And you can just feel it, and your whole body kind of goes shivers, you know. Oh, you know, even if it's just not even cold, sometimes it's a scary movie or something, you know. And those little bumps will come up. You'll get that creepy feeling. I don't know, when I'm walking through my house at night, I'm like, did I hear something? Yes. And it was just me. It just heard me. Okay, so the anatomy looks like this. It's like concentric rings right here. Okay, this is the cross section right here. So 3 concentric layers. The medulla, we're going to come across that word time and time again. Medulla, think of the medulla as middle. So we have the medulla in here. Then we have the cortex. So this has something known as soft keratin. And then the cortex has hard keratin. And it's more stiff right there. And then we have the cuticle, which is the layers of hard keratin that are in overlapping sections, kind of like a roof tile right there. And the elements in hair include oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and sulfur. All right, have you ever accidentally burned your hair? Yeah. Smells bad, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It stinks because there's sulfur in it. All right, sulfur is one of those organic, or well, not necessarily organic, but one of those compounds that you find in most living things. Also some fats and vitamins and some water is in your hair right there. I think you maybe had to write that down. No? Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about how our hair grows, all right? Because our hair does indeed grow, yeah? But it's kind of interesting because this hair is growing faster than this hair, fortunately. My eyebrow hair doesn't grow as long. Can you imagine if your eyebrow hair was on? You know, we'd be like snipping them all the time. So they don't, and it has to do with the process of growth that happens. All right, so here is the bulb right here. So we have our blood supply coming right up here and our nerve coming in there. And we have this area in here called the matrix. And the matrix are undifferentiated cells that are going to decide, are they going to be part of the medulla, the cortex, or the outer layer. All right? So matrix is another word for undifferentiated cell would be stem cell. Okay, so a stem cell that's going to become a hair cell. That's their fate in this world. They'll become part of the medulla, cortex, or cuticle according to the need and hair has growth periods and rest periods. All right, so we're all girls in here. You know what happens? You brush your hair, and there's all this hair in your brush, or on the floor, or in the drain. My husband just cleaned out the drain. He goes, "You don't even try." And I said, "I can't help it. I'm taking a shower." You know, he's pulling this nasty stuff out. I'm like, "Honey, I think it's you." And he was like, "No, I'm pretty sure it's you." So, you know, it's always coming out. So there are times like, well, a woman my age, I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I'm going bald." You know, there's so much hair. My husband's like, "Are you going bald?" But I have, you know, it's all this. So the deal is that at any given time, about 10% of my hair is about 90% of my hair is in rest stage. It's resting. So it's here and it's just resting. But 10% of the time it's growth. And you know what happens at growth time? My new hair comes up underneath like a tooth, right? It comes up underneath here and it just pops that old hair right out. Just pops it out, so you're done, you're out of here, and that's what you find in your brush. All right, so typically the hair you're finding in your brush is the stuff that's in the rest period and you're pulling it out, it's dead, it's coming out anyway. All right, so if you were pulling your hair out when you brush it, you'd feel it. It would hurt. And you probably had that, you know, get a little tangle, oh, ow, ooh, you know, you stop brushing. But sometimes you pull it and you pull out a live hair. When I say live, it's still in its rest period. It's still attached to your head right there. So our hair does that, whereas our eyebrows have a very long rest period. They don't have a long growth period. Very long rest. Are you pulling hair out? Yeah, I think at any time you could probably pull a hair out. You know?
Yeah.
And so it just depends on, and so you may know people who their hair grows really fast, some people their hair grows really slow. And it just has to do with their rest and growth periods. And I had a hairdresser who cuts my hair, and I don't get this, but she says it starts to grow faster after it's been cut. I don't know the science there. And then
they get thicker.
Well, so that's what,
It
I
just
don't know if that's
appears-
true.
It just appears thicker because the bottom
Yeah,
part of it where
because
it's-
my root doesn't know that this just got cut. It doesn't know it. So
I heard
how?
that more with like shaving like your legs. Like
Yeah,
once you do
or
that
like
for
a
the
man who
first
shaves
time-
his face, and I heard that's not true.
Yeah.
So,
It's just because like when it naturally grows out, it's like at the end it's like tapered off.
and
But
it's,
when you cut it, it gives that edge. So like
it's noticeable.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
noticeable.
stubble.
I do have a question with like that because I have a friend who every time like she shaved her legs, if she was immediately cold after that, she thought her hair would grow back like pretty quick after that.
If she was immediately cold?
Like yeah, like,
Okay.
like she shaved her legs and then like she had to like put something warm on because if she was cold,
Hmm.
her leg hairs would be grown back quicker in the morning.
Well, now here's what I'll say about that. The skin does know when you're cold, so there
Yeah.
might be something to that. You know, that if it's cold, it knows it.
It's like pushing the hair out quicker or something.
I don't know. That'd be a cool experiment. So we start one leg, shave it, one leg, you know, cold, one leg warm. See what happens. Yeah, you could try that. Okay. Now nails. We're gonna talk about nails. So you have a little spot there. Similar to hair, it is made up of layers of hard keratin. You're writing down the word hard keratin. How? Oh, you're writing down how nails grow. Okay. Well, they're made of hard keratin. They provide strength for grasping and holding. So if I ask you what are fingernails for, people are like, what do you mean what are fingernails for? Well, they do help you grasp and hold, and they also help you scratch. Who wants to get a back scratch from somebody who has fingernails all the way down to the nub, you know? You know, want some girl with the long hair, oh yeah, that feels good. Yeah. So, but they do provide strength for grasping and holding. I know I've grabbed slippery slope and I dig my nails into it, and I'll hold on to that soap easier. The matrix of the nail is just below the skin line, so you can't really see it. Sometimes though you can see that little, especially on your thumb, if you look at it, you can see that little kind of white little thing right there. It's mostly noticeable on the thumb. It's on all your nails. But that's called the lunula. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the lunula. And that's the word moon. So it's like a little moon right there. That's where the matrix is of your nail, okay? And that's where the growing takes place. So if you see, notice they have no rest period. They're always growing. Always growing. We know that, right? You're like, oh, you know. Sometimes they'll be growing and they'll get long and they'll break more easily, right? Because they're so long and they catch on stuff and this kind of thing. So, but notice how, look how far it goes in under the skin. So right here is right here, and that's a little creepy. This is the bone of the finger. And so it's under here, and so the matrix is in here, and it's pushing out this way. All right. So if you've ever met anybody who did the hammer on the nail, right? Ouch, you know, this kind of thing. And then the nail turns black, right?
I did that with hiking with my toe.
I did it too. I went hiking.
And
My toes were shoved down into my boots, my
It
my really crummy hiking, but I lost 4 toenails.
I
4.
did it with 2 or 3 of them, but the blood actually drained out from the bottom of my toenail, and so it was just left hanging there. So they cut it down to the base, and it took 2 or 3 months to normalize again.
Okay, so
I slammed my thumb in a truck door, and it got all black and really raised.
yes.
And then it started growing out, so I started to lose the fingernail.
Yes.
But it got really thin, and I could see that there was a fingernail underneath, that there was a nail underneath. So I just kind of peeled it back because it was dead. I couldn't feel it, and so I peeled it back to the point where I couldn't stop feeling it anymore because it hurt. And so then it just slowly grew out.
And push the old part out too.
And now it's really weird.
Oh, so this is pretty
It
recent?
has a little bump. It was a few months ago. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
So there is a way that you can damage so much of the matrix that you can damage it, well, it will never grow back,
Yeah.
okay? But you have to do a lot to it. It has to be a pretty bad damage, because that was pretty bad damage. You probably heard at the time, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so I know my husband has had the hammer situation, and the whole thing turns black. And so then I look at it and worry, is it going to come back? And then you can see that, and if you noticed it was coming from right there, just growing out that way. So the matrix was okay. There is a way to damage the matrix beyond repair. Then you have no more nail. And think about, isn't there a torture somewhere where they pull your nails off?
Yes.
I mean, that's horrible,
Yeah.
right? It's and they pull up. Can you imagine how tender the top of your finger would be if the nail wasn't there? All right, that would be
It's
so
horrible.
tender.
It hurt.
Yeah, oucha. Yeah, that's not good at all. Okay, so that's all about the nails, I think. Oh, you know what I wanted to talk about also? There is a disease of the nails called toe fungus. Is it toe fungus? I thought that I had a picture of toe fungus in here. Huh. I had a student one time who he said his dad had really bad toenail fungus. And that he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, and he treated it with stuff, and it was really hard to get rid of it and this kind of thing. And so finally he said, here, we're going to do the last thing I can do, and that is to take the nails off. So we actually surgically removed his toenails, and then treated it with stuff, and they grew back, and when they grew back, one of them still had a fungus. And I was like, oh man. But I will tell you this, toenail fungus doesn't kill us. It doesn't hurt us that bad. It can live symbiotically, but it's just not very pretty.
My mom
That's all.
had that on one of her big toes because we went to a not very sanitized place one time. And
Yeah, they say, I know, I'm afraid to go get my nails done at a nail place because I'm like, oh, what about a nail fungus? You never know. Because they happen to your fingernails too. But mostly it's our toes because our toes are in dark, sweaty shoes. And that's what fungus loves, that. Yeah.
Well, I don't wear sandals, and I don't have a problem with that.
Well, it doesn't, not everybody has to have it. Did your mom get rid of it?
yeah, she was able to get rid of it. It was funny though because she went to the doctor and he wasn't worried about the toe fungus at all. But my mom's toes, her big toes, kind of V off, and so if you put her toes together, they kind of do that V thing. And he was so worried about that. And she's like, I've never had to be conscious of that. And he's like, I can do a surgery. And she's like, it's not bothering me. He's like, I can straighten your toes for you.
Straighten those toes.
So we all have it, or in my family. So we're like, oh.
I think there's nothing wrong. It's not bothering you.
Yeah.
So.
So what do you want us to put for how nails grow? Just native or keratin,
I don't do nails grow. Do I have that? No, I don't have that. Okay.
Constant growth?
Yeah, that's it. Constant growth. I have it highlighted. There it is. Constant growth. How do they grow? Constantly. So we got to cut them. Unfortunately, when we cut them, they don't hurt. Doesn't hurt unless you get too close to where it's connected, and that hurts a lot.
Yeah, that's why when you go to when you shower at a camp or any other place, you bring sandals.
Right, and that because you can get even just athlete's foot,
Yeah.
which is under skin. Yeah, so yeah, you got to be careful with
Is
that.
that just feel where the bottom of your foot is itchy?
Oh yeah, real itchy. And it skin kind of gets kind of thick. Yeah. All right, our glands. We're looking at glands now. Okay, so it says skin glands. You got 3 blanks right there. You're going to say merocrine, and that's a sweat gland. And you can see it here. It's kind of like this little, group of tubules here that come up, and remember they're released at the surface right there. These are an exocrine gland, releasing things to the surface. Endocrine releases stuff to the bloodstream, exocrine to the surface through a pore. And that's going to be, of course, a sweat pore. You can see them. Sometimes some people have bigger pores than other people. In the second box, you're going to write apocrine, but put it in quotes. Do you remember what apocrine glands do?
They part of cellular material.
Yes, good. A part of, right? A part of. And so here's the deal. The sweat glands in your armpit. You may have noticed that the sweat in your armpit is a little different than the sweat on the surface of your skin. It's kind of stinky, right? We have body odor going on there. And what they thought was that those were because they were apocrine sweat glands. But it turns out that's not the thing. What the difference is that those glands in our armpit, they actually release, instead of to the surface, they release the sweat into the sebaceous gland. All right, so the sebaceous gland and the sweat gland are together, and that sebation, that sebum that's in there, that grease that's in there, and the moisture with the sweat that comes from it, that feeds bacteria. And so the stinky smell from our armpits is bacteria eating that sebum coming from your, yeah, it's kind of gross. So we usually put chemicals on there to keep the bacteria from growing and making that. It's called armpit, what's that called? Deodorant. Or antiperspirant, yeah. I think deodorant's safer than antiperspirant. So then we can see here there's sweat coming up. The sweat comes out through these pores. It just is secreted from the inside of those little tubules right there, and then secreted to the top. And we know how that cools off our skin when the wind blows because of evaporation. All right, our sebaceous glands right here, this is that same picture we were looking at, or similar. They are halocrine glands. So that's your third thing, is going to be halocrine, which means whole. So therefore, when the sweat mixes with the whole part coming through like this, that's how we get body odor right there. So they secrete sebum, is the name of it, which is an oil that softens the skin and the hair. It moisturizes it. You'll find when the weather is much drier outside, when we cold, dry weather, that sebum is less productive or less visible, so we have to put, in the wintertime, typically put on some moisturizing cream or something like that, some oil, something like that. Also, the sebaceous gland is responsible for what is known as acne. All right, so at certain times of our life, we have a bigger production of sebum. It usually has to do with hormonal reasons when we're talking about puberty and things like this. And what happens is that we have that sebaceous gland right there, and sometimes some of the cells in keratin will start to build up inside that sebaceous gland and inside the follicle and sort of plug it up a little bit. And it swells up, and it actually swells closed, and then that sebum keeps being produced, and it kind of grows and grows, and we have what is known as a blemish, or a zit, if you want to call it that. And here it is below the surface. It makes the bump right there. Notice it's in conjunction with the hair. It's inflammation. And if you were to squeeze it, it would pop that sebum right out of there. It looks like little white stuff coming out. I will say if you do that, you have a better chance of leaving a scar behind. And so you may just want to leave it alone. Sometimes it's hard to. And I don't know if y'all noticed, but with the masks and stuff, my chin is like breaking out. And I think it's that mask. I don't want to wear that mask
Only
anymore.
my right cheek breaks out.
And do you think it's because of the mask on you?
I don't know. Only my right cheek. That's why it
Interesting.
makes a mess.
All right, we're moving to 3B now. So you can change your book over to 3B. I think it's just the next page, yes? And we're going to be getting the basics of the skeletal system, because we have a whole module 4 all about the skeletal system. All right, so this is lab 6 right here. The skeletal system, it has 5 functions. There, we're good. We have a box for the 5 functions of the skeletal system. We have, number 1, support, weight bearing. They hold us in place there. Protection, they're hard covering for our organs. Our skull is protecting our brain. Movement, we have articulated joints. That's joints that can move. So we have movement. 4, storage. It is storing all sorts of things. Minerals like calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. It's also storing fat in what is known as the marrow of the cell. So bone marrow. And then the 5th function is called hemopoiesis. Yeah, so look at that close. It's not homostasis or anything like that. It's hemo, H-E-M-O, poiesis, P-O-I-E-S-I-S. That is talking about the manufacture of blood cells. So it turns out all of our blood is made in our bones. We'll look at some details of that here in a second.
So like when you break a bone, is that like internal bleeding?
It can be. So a broken bone can be very serious because when it breaks and if it bleeds into you could get a septic kind of a thing or infection. Really, it happens if you know what a compound fracture is. It's when it pokes out through the skin. Yeah, the bone gets sharp. It breaks, it's sharp. It pokes out through the skin. Well, there's all this bacteria on your skin. There's all this bacteria in the world. If that gets into your blood, you see, and that can be very serious. A huge septicemia there. Yeah. So we have to be careful with that. If you have a broken bone that your bone is sticking out, get to the hospital. Yeah, and they will clean you up.
It's also extremely
It's extremely what?
Painful.
Oh yeah, very painful. Anybody have a broken bone?
Yeah. I broke it.
I've never broken a bone.
I don't break things, I tear.
I've never broken a bone in my whole life. None of my kids have. They all say that I have 4 boys. They all say that Casper boys bounce. They jumped off the roof. No broken bones. Yeah, none.
I don't break things, I just
surprised
tear.
that was broken.
Yeah?
I don't break.
Oh, and maybe like joints and stuff.
I
I've
broke my nose and this week
I've broken
actually
my
ripped
thumb,
the cartilage
my foot,
I recommend that.
and
My
my
nephew.
nose.
Things you can't even fix.
And both
I mean, you just have to wait for them to heal on their own, right?
And broke my
Ankles?
What? Foot. I broke
And I
my
got
foot.
slammed
Okay.
with
My
the 800 pound
metatarsal.
machine in the
Yep.
wall.
Yep. But you can't do anything for that.
Yeah, that's right.
Somebody broke their face?
My friend broke his face.
I
Broke
broke
his
my
face.
nose.
Yeah.
I broke my
He
nose.
got bucked off of his horse.
Like by the eye here?
Yeah, so he got bucked off his horse and all of this got broken. And
Yikes.
he had to get,
Reconstructive surgery?
yeah.
Ah.
Miss Casper, you know how last week we were talking about how cartilage tears easily?
Yes.
Well, I think it was Wednesday, I actually ripped the cartilage in my ear.
No.
No, it was Thursday, yeah.
How?
So we were setting up that new rent house,
Yeah.
and well, we got these 800-pound arcade games, the skee ball machines, and we were moving them, and they asked me to get between the wall and the machine, and they said, just tell us when you're ready so we can set it down. Well, everyone lost their grip but me, and I got slammed, the corner of it hit right here, and my head got slammed between it, and it ripped the cartilage here and here.
Yikes. Is that what your mom was talking about when she said the
Yes.
doctor had to take a look?
Mhm.
It probably didn't bleed too much. The only bleeding would have been from the skin.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's not a lot of blood supply. There's no blood supply.
It really didn't bleed at all because it hit.
Okay. Did it hurt?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so here's hemopoiesis. Here's that word larger if you need it. So that's the process of manufacturing blood cells. We will talk about this in some detail when we get to the circulatory system, or maybe even next time. I think next time in the module 4, I think we'll talk about the process by which it goes. It happens in what is known as the red marrow. There's red marrow and there's yellow marrow. Yellow marrow is the storage of fat, and the red marrow is where hemopoiesis is taking place. It makes red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. All right, these right here are called stem cells. They're going to decide, am I going to be an erythrocyte, a lymphocyte, a leukocyte, or a platelet? They get to decide that. So that's hemopoiesis. Did you have a blank for that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, the next boxes are the types of bones. We have long bones, short bones, flat bones, irregular bones, and sesamoid bones. You're going to write each one of those down. Long bone. The longest bone in your body is your thigh bone, called the femur. A short bone, we have those in our wrists. These little ones right here, these are called the carpals. The carpals, the metacarpals. Tarsals, metatarsals. Pericarpal tunnel syndrome. That's the nerves going through the carpals. Flat bones. We have a flat bone. That's showing the skull, like the back of our skull right there, but also your rib bones are flat. Irregular bones are the ones we really can't tell you what, that's just a vertebra. That's a vertebrae, it's the shape of a vertebra. Irregular. Sesamoid, it's sort of round, it's our kneecap. I don't know if there's any other sesamoid bones or if it's just limited to the kneecap. I don't think there's one of those on our elbow. Those are just a joint. That's just a joint. This is the joint plus a little bone right on top of it. In fact, that's one of the reasons we can stand upright.
Is
That would be
that why?
good to move
Is that
it.
why our knees pop?
I actually tripped over a gate and we are redoing our floor of our dining room, and so we tore up the floor, and so it was just concrete underneath it. And so I tripped over a gate going into the dining room, and so from standing up, I fell directly onto my knee, like on the top of the kneecap, and it hurts so bad.
Yeah, and you can
funny bone.
you can knock them at a joint. There's a little, like the rubber band thing holding on to them. You can flip the whole thing over, and you know, and a doctor has to go whoop and move it back, and it hurts.
I
like
didn't-
crazy.
And you
I
can
didn't
kind of
dislocate it, but I feel like I messed it up because now my knee, like, sometimes it aches like around. the
Oh
knee.
wow! How long ago did it happen?
It was years ago. It was
Oh really? So a
years
while.
ago.
Mm.
But
I will say it takes a lot longer for bones to heal than it takes for skin to heal.
Is that why
Our joints pop because in between the joint, little gases will form in there, and when you pop it, you pop the bubble.
It's like knuckles.
Yeah, you just pop little bubbles in
My
there.
knees pop
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, I can.
My-
Like
my
the
knees
HC
pop
sound
and
is
makes
next
me
to
talk
it.
really loud.
It's the one who comes. You're just all out at one class, you'll all have to start popping next.
They say if you pop your knuckles, it makes your joints really big. It's not true.
I've heard that.
It's not true.
I'm like,
It does. It actually takes away that little bubble for a while, but more bubbles will form. Yeah. All right, here they are again. Here's a long bone. Here's some short bones. Irregular notice we're looking vertebra. Patella is our sesamoid, and then the frontal flat bone right there. Okay. Now, ossification of bone. So what happens with bone is it all starts off very soft, and it hardens over time. Okay. So it starts. All bone starts with cartilage. And little babies. Did we talk about little babies and how they
they're
look?
just big balls of cartilage.
And you could yeah, just big balls of cartilage. Now, some of their so what you have a blank call it ossification of bone. Ossification, you state bone starts as cartilage and it hardens into bone. Now, when babies are born, they've got some ossified bone tissue, but they have lots of cartilage still. So this is still in the womb right here. Then baby gets born, and as we grow, that hardens or ossifies into bone tissue. So bone is hard and cartilage isn't as hard. We've seen cartilage. We know how that can be nice and bendy. So what happens, it starts as cartilage and it becomes what is known as cancellous bone. Cancellous, we'll look at that in really a lot of detail in module 4. Cancellous bone means spongy bone. It doesn't mean spongy because it's soft. It means spongy because it's got holes in it. And these holes are in it because guess what's going through the holes? What's being made there? Yeah, blood vessels are going through those holes. In fact, the area where the blood is being made in that red marrow, that's all cancellous bone tissue all the time. It's spongy bone. And it's usually here at the top. You can see it says spongy bone right there, holes in it. Down here it gets compact bone. So let's take a look. A long bone's the best way to look at that. See the top here? See all those holes right there with the red in there? So I've got spongy bone, cancellous bone with red marrow. Then as I get along the sides right here, it gets very compact. The bone is very hard. In the middle, there's a hollow spot in there where we have the marrow. So these are the words you're writing down. Terms for bone segments. The first one is called the diaphysis. That's the long part here in the middle part of the bone, the diaphysis. And the end pieces are called the epiphysis. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that one.
Is there 3 of them?
Yes, kind of. This is the end, and this is where the cancellous bone is, down here at the epiphysis. Here's the proximal epiphysis, that's closer to the body, and the distal epiphysis. I think it might be the air conditioner. It's filled with a vascular space where hemopoiesis. I misspelled the word there. Hemopoiesis occurs right up in there. And then we have, you're going to say epiphyseal lines. The epiphyseal lines are right up here. Okay, and what happens is that's what's known as the growth line or the growth plate. And I'm going to show you on the next slide so we can understand that a little better. This is where ossification is taking place.
Where?
At the epiphyseal line. In our next slide, I'll show that a little better. I think I have all these words here, yeah. All right, so we're looking at our long bone here. And you can see our diaphysis is the shaft, the long part right here. But we could also say that this part right here is the oldest part of the bone. So the bone is growing from the epiphyseal lines, okay? It showed them a little bit here. See, they're showing several of them there. But this makes it a little more easy to understand when I just put a line across there, okay? So what's happening is that all of the bone around the epiphyseal line is cartilage. And as it starts to grow, it starts to push that way and it ossifies. It's also pushing this way, and ossifying. So it's turning from cartilage into spongy bone, from spongy bone into compact bone. And this around here is called compact bone. It's very hard here. You'll see, I think I'm bringing the bone next time, that you'll see this is also hard, but since it has those holes in there, it's not as, compact. This is compact, right? So it's all close together. Next module, we'll see how what those cells look like under a microscope. All right? So here's our cancellus. Here's our growth epiphyseal line right there. So it's all growing this direction. From the epiphyseal line down the bone and making the bone, elongating the bone right there. And here's our compact bone. All right, so the difference is, I guess you can see all the holes in there. Remember, blood vessels are going to be in there. The top picture shows normal cancellous tissue. The bottom tissue shows osteoporosis, what happens to make our bones more brittle. And it really has to do with losing certain minerals like calcium in our diet. It mostly happens to women. I think we'll talk about that. I think we talk about that next time. Okay, yeah, because we're going to do a skeletal system overview right now. In this picture here, you can see that I have the head, the skull, and the trunk right here is in kind of a, what you call that, pink color. And then the purple color is the other parts, the arms and the legs, and it's called the girdle right here. All right, so there are two main parts of the skeletal system. We have 206 bones. You will not have to learn all 206 bones, but you'll have to learn some. The axial skeleton supports the head, neck, and trunk. So this pink part right here is called the axial skeleton. And then the appendicular skeleton includes the pelvis and all the limbs, the appendages. Appendicular, the appendages. All right, and we're going to go through each one of these and name some bones. So the axial skeleton is the head, neck, and trunk, chest area. And the appendicular skeleton is the pelvis and the limbs. And then you have a box on the bottom of page 22. We're going to talk about the upper ones. You're just going to name a few. Are y'all ready for that? All right, here's the upper appendicular skeleton. You're going to put a few of these in the box. We call it the pectoral girdle. Up at the top, the pecs, the pectoral muscles. Right here, we have the clavicle. The clavicle is also known as your collarbone, but I want you to write it down as clavicle. Our shoulder blade in the back here is a flat bone back there. It's called the scapula. And then our top arm bone is the humerus. Notice the way it's spelled, not as in funny, although it's connected to that nerve we call the funny bone. It's not a bone at all, it's a nerve that hits it and makes everything tingle. It actually is at this joint here at the elbow. And we have two bones in the lower arm, the radius and the ulna. And the ulna goes to the pinky. So I think of it, the small bone goes to the small finger. So remember it. And then the radius is the big bone. And then we have our hand, includes our carpals, metacarpals, and the fingers are known as the phalanges. Carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. Remember, these are going to be some of the little short bones in there. Long bones elsewhere. Flat bone up here, long bone at the clavicle. And if the bones are long, they can do hemopoiesis. Some of those short bones don't have enough space. All right, our lower appendicular skeleton is the pelvic girdle. All right, the pelvic girdle, talking about, of course, the pelvis. So that is also known as the coxa, the pelvis, which includes actually three bones, the ilium, the pubis, and the ischium. The sacrum is the tailbone. Longest bone in our body is our thigh bone, known as the femur. Our kneecap is the patella. Remember that sesamoid bone. And then we have two bones in the lower leg. We have the tibia and the fibula. Notice the difference. Not tibula. No, it's fibula and tibia. There's no L in tibia. Tibia and fibula. And the fibula is the smaller of the two bones. If you've ever eaten chicken legs, you know there's that little tiny bone. There's a big bone, kind of a big bone, and that little tiny one that sticks out. That's the tibia and the fibula. And then our foot, we have tarsals, metatarsals, and our toes are phalanges. All right, there's our hand and our foot. So our carpal, metacarpal, phalanges. tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges. All right, here's the skull. Interaxial skeleton. Y'all have this, don't you?
Yes.
The skull. All right. We have some interesting bones here. Okay. So on both sides of our head, these blue colors here is called the parietal bone. The back is called the occipital bone. That is covering the occipital part of the brain, the occipital lobe of the brain. Turns out the occipital lobe of the brain is responsible for all your vision. So we actually have our vision in the back of our brain. We have our temporal lobes, one on each side. Our frontal lobe covering the frontal part of the brain. The mandible is our lower jaw, and the maxilla is the upper jaw. And then the zygomaticus, the zygomatic bones are protecting your eyes. They're your eye sockets. It's really, our eyes need to be protected. And that's why we have this big bone around here. So the friend that fell off the horse or whatever, he could have had damage to an eye if he wasn't careful, you know, because those bones are really protecting that.
And it took a while to heal.
I bet. Yeah, because bone, it does, we'll talk next time about bone and how bone, why it takes so long for bone to heal. But it does heal. Then we have hollow spaces inside our skull known as sinus cavities. That helps to keep our head from being too heavy. It also contributes to the sound of your voice. If somebody is a singer, their cavities inside there will lend toward the tenor of their voice, the sound of their voice.
What's the top one?
Parietal, this one.
Okay.
Parietal, which are these ones right here. So remember these bones right here are for protecting our brain. Notice that the little lines in between those are a type of joint called a suture joint. They're not movable. They're immovable joints, which kind of seems contradictory. The immovable joint called a suture joint, which I think that comes up again here eventually. All right, let's watch this little video. I don't think there's any sound to this. This is going to show you the different bones in the skull. All right, so there they are, of course, different colors like that. And then this animation takes them all apart. Addison, you might remember this from general science or something. And it gets a little creepy. Yeah, we can see there's a bunch of them in there that I didn't name because we don't need to know them all. You'll see when it comes apart some of the small ones in there. They come apart those sutures, and it's a little creepy. Those teeth come right out of there. Look at all those little bones inside. The yellow and the green and the purple. The maxilla into two pieces, the mandible down below. See the small ones in there? So if you go to med school, you'll need to know those. Kind of cool, huh? And back together. All right. Some bone terms. A suture is a junction, a type of joint between flat bones of the skull, a suture joint. Okay, it's a junction or type of joint between the flat bones of the skull. A process is a projection on a bone. It sticks out. You'll see that with the vertebrae here in a minute. The medius is a passageway between, it's a little different than a foramen. A foramen is a hole or tunnel through a bone. And then a sinus is that hollowed out space in a bone. I don't like the way that's put. Hollowed out almost sounds like a bone. It's just a space within a bone. It's not like it got hollowed out. It was just made that way. That's why the bones in the skull are flat, so there's spaces in there. That does help to reduce weight. Bones can be heavy. And like I said, helps with our voice and that kind of thing. Have y'all ever taken a chicken bone and put it in vinegar? Yeah. We did it for class. It's a hard bone when you put it in, and a week later it's rubber. It's pretty fun. And even a cooked bone, I found out, from a rotisserie chicken will work. That's what I use now. I do it for my general science class. All right, we good? Next, we're going to look at some of these in the spine. Okay, so what do I want you to write down under the spine? Okay, what do y'all have? What space do y'all have? List the, up at the top, list the vertebral sections. Here's what I want you to write down. I want you to write cervical vertebrae. Can you see those words? Cervical vertebrae, there are 7 of them. So write cervical vertebrae times 7. That's your neck. C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. If you have a break up in there, if it's up high, C1, C2, you're dead. If it's C3, you can be a quadriplegic. C4, C5, a paraplegic. C7, you're okay as far as your paralysis, but if it's broken, it's broken. You have to take care of it. It's protecting the spinal cord in there. And the bones have these, remember these are those specialized bones? Notice they have a, what's that hole called I just told you? No, it's a foramen, right. So that's why the sinus hollowed out space, I don't like the way that's defined like that. The hole through the bone is called a foramen. There it is. And remember what's sticking out? What are those called? Processes. A process. And you're going to see how these processes actually interlock right here to make this really cool puzzle. The next thing you're going to write down is thoracic vertebrae. Thoracic, T-H-O-R-A-C-I-C. And there's 12 of those. That's your back. That's your neck. So cervical, your neck. Thoracic is your middle back. There's 12 of them. Thoracic vertebrae times 12. And then we have our lumbar vertebrae times 5. That's the lower back right down here. And then the sacrum is the tailbone, and then the coccyx right here, then the end of the tailbone. If you ever know anybody who fell down really hard on their rump like that, like skating or something, you can break that coccyx. Ouch, oh my gosh, that hurts. I haven't done it, I haven't broken any bones, so. But I had a friend who did, and she couldn't even sit down. She had to lay on her side and front for months. We were on a band trip, we were on a bus, and she couldn't sit in the bus to go home. She had to, yeah, it's terrible. All right, so the things you were writing down were cervical vertebrae, thoracic vertebrae, lumbar vertebrae, sacrum, and coccyx. Coccyx. You got all those in those boxes? Did I give you 5 things for 4 boxes?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Then you can just leave off coccyx and just say sacrum. Coccyx is really part of it, kind of there.
Oh wow, I put that in the
Wait,
wrong
can you go back?
section.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think it's at the top of page
I put
24.
I put it in vertebral
Yeah, I
column
think that's
specific.
Oh, okay. What are we supposed to do about that? Yeah.
I don't know.
That's okay there. I'm okay with it there. Here's our cervical vertebrae, C1, C2, the atlas and the axis right here. If your spinal cord is broken at this height right here, you no longer can have rudimentary functions like breathing and heartbeat. So that kills you. That's how a broken bone kills you. At C2, that can also kill you, but you can if you're saved in time, they can get you on a respirator. So y'all know that guy who played Superman, Christopher Reeve, had a horse accident where they were jumping over a horse jumping fence or whatever, and the horse stopped, and Christopher Reeve did not. Straight down on his neck, and he broke right at C2. And he lived for many years, but on a respirator. He had to have a respirator breathing for him at all times. And then we have down below, you get this, and then we get where it's down to C7, C6, and C7. If you have a break there, then you can pretty much recover from that.
Can you still be conscious even if you're on a respirator?
Oh yeah, he was.
You was?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if you have a tube going down your throat, you can't speak. So they put a little thing here, tracheotomy, and you can speak. You have to learn how to speak again, but you can push air through there and speak. So in between, notice these, look at these processes that are coming down here. Remember our foramen through the middle there has our spinal cord going up through there. Notice between them we have a little joint right here, and we call that a cervical disc. It's just cartilage in there that's cushioning between the bones. And then we have a little thing called a facet joint right there. Our thoracic cage, I want you to know this, it protects our heart and lungs. We have 12 pair of ribs. Is it pairs? Pairs of ribs? 12 pair of ribs. True ribs will attach to the breastbone called the sternum. And then the ones that are attached just to other ribs and not to the sternum are called false ribs. They're not directly attached. And then we have those floating ribs out here to the side. The last two just float. They're back over here by your back. right here. The story about men having one less rib than females, that is not true. We all have the same number of ribs. Unless, I mean, there can be some people who are born without a rib, I suppose. But no, men and women have the same number of ribs. So 12 pair, some attached to the sternum, some not. And this is all cartilage in here as well, because guess what the rib cage needs to do? It needs to be able to move, because we're breathing, right? So those little joints in there need to be able to move pretty freely. It's probably fibrocartilage. It's not elastic cartilage. It doesn't want to move that freely. But I think it's not hyaline. I think it's probably fibrocartilage. But I don't know that for sure. All right. Now I think we just have some questions to answer.
Yeah.
What will you find at the end of bones where they interface with other tissues or bones? We know that. Actually, at the end on the outside of the bones. Yeah, cartilage. A cartilage cap. We call it articular cartilage. What is unique about the processes on the vertebral column? Those processes sticking, they interlock, right? I think that's what I put. Interlocking processes keep the vertebral column from slipping. They're like this really great puzzle. We can still bend over and things won't slip out of joint there.
That would be scary.
That would be bad.
Isn't that how some people throw their back out?
Well, I think that's really more muscular. There could be some nerve damage right there, but it's probably muscular when you throw your back out. You want to make sure that the spinal column that's in there doesn't get damaged. So that's really, really highly protective for that.
Does it have to do with the muscle around there?
Mhm.
Like if it's too strong or weak?
Yeah, it does. So there are certain exercises you're supposed to be able to do. So when we talk about muscles, so there's this big muscle in your back that's shaped like this around your back called the trapezius.
Yeah.
And I'm lifting my stuff and I'm always hurting my trapezius. I've got to figure out an exercise to keep my trapezius from being super sore from
I've also
lifting
heard
stuff.
that you can't like just bend over and lift things. You're supposed to bend your knees.
Definitely.
And your legs.
Otherwise, you're going to stress out those muscles
Because
in
your
your back.
legs are really strong.
They're better that way. What do you find in the center of the vertebral column that needs protection? Spinal cord. Yeah. All right, and y'all, that's it. We're done with the module. So next week you're going to bring me study guide. We'll take a quiz.
Okay.
We'll
so
do a lab.
I accidentally did.
Your study guide?
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you want to see it.
Well, do you want to study it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do that instead.
We do have a quiz already?
We do.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, and I'll end the recording here.